Yeah.
No, we're not. You're not going up there. Sorry, kid.
That's right.
No.
I bumped into a thru hiker on his way up the Arizona Trail while I was taking pictures of the Overlook. He had started at the Mexico border and was on his way north. I've always been super impressed with the idea of hiking across an entire state. It's one thing to go camping a few times a year, but really impressive to see the entire state on foot. Unfortunately, I've got a bit of a bad ankle from my time in the Army and have to be content with shorter hikes and driving to touristy overlooks. I was excited for this leg of the journey. Last time I saw the north rim of the Grand Canyon, I think I was in my early teens. Plus it was another big park where I could surely catch some video of horrible tourists absolutely demolishing our national parks, and so I could better compare to the older, better tourists from those good old days. Right inside the gate we saw some of the bison that had almost been hunted off the face of the earth until Americans decided to try to protect species that were endangered with extinction. Now they're plentiful enough to just be a tourist photo opportunity. It's nice to see success stories like this. In fact, this herd is large enough that it's being split up and sent to rebuild some of the herds on Indian lands. Speaking of which, everybody was staying safely away. I needed to use a telephoto to get close-ups. All the other people were just watching using binoculars. All good tourists, just enjoying the beauty of the park. After getting camp set up at the North Rim campground, I followed the steady train of tourists past the cabins and out to Bright Angel Overlook. It's a tiny overlook that can only fit about 20 people cozily, but everybody was being very courteous. People would take their turn at the railing, then swap out with the people behind them. Some people content just to sit in back and watch it all. I headed back to the lodge for lunch and passed people of every creed and color, enjoying the views, pointing out details, loving the park, but certainly not to death. Lots of selfies, or couple selfies, or family selfies with a beautiful view in the background, all from the trail and safely behind the railing. It's a busy area and a built-up area, but just like the historic Union Pacific tour, it's basically just a bunch of people enjoying their vacation and the breathtaking views. First stop for the afternoon was Point Imperial, a gorgeous view from the highest viewpoint in the park. Here I actually caught some tourists destroying the park. Well, not destroying the park. They walked about 15 feet off the trail, and the sign that told them not to was a bit weathered, but some obviously knew of their mistake after they had already made it. I wanted to make a big deal about tourists destroying the park and violating the park rules, but I only saw one more violation in the Grand Canyon, so let's just get it out of the way. Somebody flew a drone into the air and back down again. I'm not sure if somebody told them to stop or if they were just trying to fly up and squeak an aerial photo in and then be back down in 60 seconds, darting off before anybody caught him. And you know what? While we're at it, let's get the whole trip done. This is all the violations I saw. I saw some girls go a little too far out on the rim for an Instagram shot in Bryce, although there were no explicit signs telling them not to in that location, and some people cut across the hill at Sunrise Point rather than walk down the paved trail. That's it. Of the roughly 10,000 or so tourists that I crossed paths with, only 10 to 15 actually broke the rules. And not to downplay their violations, but they're not exactly the most egregious violations either. In a park the size of the Grand Canyon, trampling some plants 10 feet off the side of the overlook isn't exactly destroying the parks, especially when compared to talks about deforesting the Grand Staircase. It was at this point I started to realize that my goal of making this video to compare how tourism now is worse than when it started was wrong. We're actually better tourists than we used to be. We see the occasional story of some YouTubers walking on Grand Prismatic Spring, or some idiot pushed over a million-year-old hoodoo in Goblin Valley. Then when we see a picture of people lined up to go up to Angel's Landing, we think they're one and the same, but they're not. Those people are patiently waiting in line for their turn at the Overlook. There's a lot of them, but they're good tourists. The overall ratio of good tourists enjoying the park to bad tourists breaking the rules is shifting away from rule breakers and towards better behaved tourists. It only seems like things are getting worse because there are just more of all of them overall. I realize that I'm not surrounded by hordes of locust-like tourists trashing the beloved parks. I'm surrounded by people who are loving the parks just as much as me and obeying all the rules as well. They aren't my enemy, they're my allies. And while there are more tourists than I prefer, I'm not more entitled to the parks than they are. I'm just another tourist myself. I should stop hating them when their only sin is to want to do the exact same thing I want to do. Even the 15 people I saw breaking the rules were just doing so out of laziness, mistake, or lack of education as to how they should behave. I don't think the problem is too many bad tourists now. Now I think the problem is the new modern tourists just need a little guidance in how to best experience and protect the parks. Let me qualify that. As a photographer, I love to stop at every turnoff just to see why the turnoff was created. For whatever reason, somebody thought that this would be a good place to stop, and if it's for a picture, I want to see it for myself. And most of these turnoffs are nearly always empty. There were only a couple of cars, and those that did stop rarely stopped for more than 5 minutes. For example, did you know that up on the North Rim there's a small Indian pueblo that you can visit? Hundreds of sites dot the plateau like this one used for summertime farming. Food was saved on a rock spire out over the rim of the plateau, and in winter the natives would migrate down into the canyon to similar communities alongside the river. While checking out this guided tour section of the rim overlook, there was only one other person there, and she only wandered over because she saw me wander over and followed to see what I was looking at. I think this is the true folly of the new surge of tourism the parks are seeing. It's not a problem of abusing the parks or even overwhelming the parks and loving them to death. It's that the people think that there's a best place to go and they only focus on that, so you end up with 2 or 3 places that are completely overrun with tourists and the rest of the park is nearly abandoned. I think it stems from an internet top 10 list mentality where we read some article of these amazing places and focus on seeing that exact same place for ourselves, overlooking everything we pass on the way. Instagram does the same thing where people take amazing pictures of some specific spot and then everybody wants to reproduce the same identical picture, overlooking millions of equally amazing and unique pictures along the way. The other similar modern mentality is that the view is always best from the end of the trail, so there's no purpose stopping along the way. The only busy places I saw in North Grand Canyon were Bright Angel Point, Cape Royale, and Point Imperial, the ends of the roads. But the history I learned at WALHALLA Point gave me a deeper feeling of connection to the park and the people who had lived on these cliffsides before me, and I think my favorite views were from Roosevelt Point. Okay, so I'm in the Grand Canyon now, one of the busiest parks. I pulled off at a overlook that had hardly any cars on it, took some pictures, there was one other car there. Then as I was getting in the car, I saw a sign saying that it was a trailhead. Followed the trail because, hey, why not? I got another 2 hours before dinner. And now I'm at this overlook. There's nobody else here. I don't think there's anybody on the trail between me and the parking lot. It just shows it's really easy to avoid the crowds if you go to something other than the most popular spot in the park. If you do that, you can discover all kinds of cool things. A little known secret about the national parks is that in the big national parks nobody ever touches the picnic areas. So I'm a stone's throw away from Cape Royale where everybody's taking selfies and everything. Gorgeous view of Grand Canyon, and I got the whole place to myself. Cooking dinner. Get that guy before he goes away. All to myself. Might as well, you know. Then I can go take pictures of sunset over on the point. Got the whole place. beats the hell eating a peanut butter sandwich out of the trunk in the parking lot. People are in too much of a hurry to get from Overlook to Overlook to check off their top 10 list to say they saw it all, but in the process they never stop to absorb what they were there to see. And having dinner nearby meant I could go relax on the rim waiting to get the perfect sunset picture of the Grand Canyon. Unfortunately, the overcast weather foiled my plans for a mind-bending photo. Thank goodness I'd spent plenty of time at all those abandoned overlooks earlier. But the day gave me a lot to think about from now on. If all the other tourists are just people like me enjoying the parks, how are we all going to fit in them in the future as even more people discover and enjoy them?